Week 16 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few quarterbacks I would look to hit off the wire this week. The first guy, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. So Purdy, the last couple weeks here, since he's come in for Jimmy Garoppolo, has looked pretty good. Week 14 versus Tampa Bay. In that one, 185 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 rush yards, a rushing touchdown. And Week 15 at the Seattle Seahawks in that one, 217 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. So right now, Week 16, a pretty decent matchup versus the Washington Commanders here for Brock Purdy. We know Deebo Samuel's probably going to be out, but George Kittle stepped up with a huge ball game in Week 15 for the San Francisco 49er team. And then when you got a guy like Christian McCaffrey in the backfield who could do it all, obviously, he's a guy that could go out there and help your team week in and week out. So right now, Brock Purdy available in 80% of fantasy leagues here. And with a good matchup coming in Week 16, if you got an injury to Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson you can't trust coming back, he's maybe a guy you could use here, even though I know it's the quarterfinals. But he's a guy who looked at this week. The next guy is Mike White of the New York Jets. To Zach Wilson, he actually looked decent in that ball game, but the Jets fell to the Detroit Lions in Week 15 here. But Mike White, he's still out there in tons of fantasy leagues now with 79%. And he's got a great matchup next week versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. If White's going to be named the starter once again and healthy to go, that gives up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So the last few games here for Mike White before missing Week 15's game, Week 12 versus the Bears, 315 pass yards, 3 touchdowns. Week 13 in Minnesota, 369 passing, 2 windows, 7 rushing or rushing touchdown. And Week 14 at Buffalo, 268 passing. So right here this week, if he plays in this game, I know it's a short week, Thursday Night Football versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, where their defense really don't stop anybody, is this Jaguar team, even though they pulled out a great ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys Week 15 with the pick 6 ended. But anyway, I think Mike White could get things going. He's got Garrett Wilson, who's been a great rookie this season. Elijah Moore and him have a good rapport. And also Corey Davis, if he could come back in this game. But anyway, Mike White right now available in 79% of fantasy leagues. And he's definitely a quarterback I look to add this week here, because I don't think they're just going to get away from Mike White that quickly once again, is this Jet team. Even though Zach Wilson did play good in that ball game for the most part in Week 15. Quarterback I look to add on the wire this week here, Sam Darnold of the Carolina Panthers. So the next few options here that I'm mentioning are guys for deeper leagues for the most part. Sam Darnold available right now, 94% of fantasy leagues. In the last few games here since he's been back in the starting lineup, this Panther team's actually 2-1. Week 12 versus Denver, 164 passing, a touchdown and a rushing touchdown. Week 14 at the Seahawks in that ball game, 120 passing, a touchdown, 30 rushing. Week 15 versus the Steelers, 225 and a passing touchdown. So surprisingly, the turnovers haven't been an issue here for Sam Darnold. The thing is here, he's got to get that second touchdown on the board. And I know in the passing game they don't really have weapons. It's DJ Moore and Terrace Marshall is their top 2 guys, and that's not saying much numbers for those guys this season, even though we know Sam Darnold and DJ Moore have a good rapport. No pun intended. And we saw it last season before Darnold went down with injury. So right now in deeper leagues, 2 quarterback leagues, 16-team leagues, or whatever the case, if you need a quarterback, Sam Darnold is a decent option. And he's got a pretty good matchup coming up in Week 16 versus Detroit that gives up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. The next guy is Matt Ryan of the Indianapolis Colts. And Matt Ryan and this Colt team, what a loss to blow a 33-point lead versus the Minnesota Vikings in Week 15 here. So right now, Week 16, decent matchup. Monday Night Football versus the Los Angeles Chargers, even though we saw their defense pretty much shut down that Tennessee Titan offense. So the last few games here for Matty Ice, he's been a mediocre to poor quarterback. Week 12 versus Pittsburgh, 199 passing, touchdown, Into, 22 rushing, a fumble loss. Week 13 at the Cowboys, 233 pass yards in that one, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a fumble loss. And Week 15 at Minnesota before the collapse, 182 passing and a touchdown. So right here, another guy like Darnold, deeper leagues, 2 quarterback leagues. If you're desperate for a quarterback, he's a guy put out there as an option, and he's available right now in 86% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final quarterback I looked at on the wire this week here is Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans. So Tannehill right now available in 59% of fantasy leagues here. And I know the numbers haven't been great for the most part this season. But next week, pretty good matchup versus the Houston Texans, who obviously can't stop anyone. We know they're 1-12-1 on the season is this Texan team. And Tannehill right now in a pinch, I think he's a decent streaming option if that's what you're doing in the playoffs at quarterback. Week 13 at Philly, 141 passing, a touchdown, 34 rushing. Week 14 versus Jacksonville, 254, 2 touchdowns. And in those 16 rushing, 2-point conversion, and a fumble loss. In Week 15 at the Chargers, 165 passing, and in throwing a rushing touchdown. So right now, available, like I said, in 59% of fantasy leagues. Good matchup versus Houston coming up in Week 16. And he's a quarterback I look to add, so that's a few quarterbacks I look to add on the waiver wire. 16 of the fantasy football season.